Hi, and welcome to What Fast Audiences Want. My name is Joe Schramm, and I'm here today with our guest for this session, Alejandro Rojas. Alejandro is the Director of Applied Analytics at Parrot Analytics. Good. Hi, Alejandro, welcome. And why don't you tell us very quickly what you do at Parrot?
Hi, Joe. Nice to meet you and nice to be here. I'm really glad to be part of this conversation. And what I do at Parrot, essentially, I looked at a ton of data. And when we're looking at data, we're always thinking from a perspective of an economist, where we have supply and demand. And in today's economy, if you think about like the end user, it only has like a limited amount of time to put like their attention. So by actually measuring supply and demand, you can actually understand what resonates and what doesn't.
What resonates and what doesn't. Okay, great. Well, that's a great place to start. So I'm going to kick off with a question. I know you have some slides to share with us, but first of all, I just want to say that I understand that fast really requires a quantity of content inventory. And so should fast platforms consider adding exclusive titles to their inventory, or should they just rely on titles that are also already available on other services?
Yeah, I mean that's a great point to start because at the end of the day, what we've seen across like all of these different players is that exclusive content is a very powerful weapon to actually attract subscribers. So we see that as an element. I mean, like especially when we look at the data, that's kind of what we see. But in the case of fast, I think it would have like a different. There's like a different perspective. So what I'm gonna do is like let me show you a slide where you can actually see how what the data says, and then we from looking at the data, then we can kind of like basically interpret that and see really what's happening in here.
Okay.
So you have supply and demand, and what we have in here in the horizontal axis is the percentage of the titles or the demand that is actually coming from exclusive content. Okay, so addressing your question about like, okay, how important is exclusive content? Of course, for like SVODs, and you see this in on the offering, on the supply side, they're like really almost like winning that race. Like they have over 60% of the titles are actually exclusive.
Right.
In the case
Of
of Fast,
course.
it's actually like half that, right? Um, and it makes sense because like again, like exclusive content is a powerful weapon to attract subscribers, but then also it's expensive, right? So depending on the model and depending on the level of monetization, then like you have to kind of like be cognizant of how your business model work. And what we see is like in the case of Fast, it's like this yellow dot in here, like it's about 1/3 of all the titles are actually exclusive. And in terms of the demand, remember, like we measure demand based on like all of these different signals that we collect from consumers that are directly associated to a specific title. So whenever we see a title that is in exclusive, then we collect all the signals and we compare like all of this volume of signals with the overall demand for all the other titles that a fast provider would have. And what we see is like 20% of the demand is actually directed to these like exclusive titles. So
Right.
what that tells you is like really it's not, I mean, it's not the core, you know?
Well, that would lead me to another question then. Shouldn't fast platforms then rely more on older library titles? Shows that have already completed their seasons with no more seasons coming for it as
Yeah, exactly. Because like that's when you're thinking about fast, you're also trying to see how can I really leverage audiences that may be on the long tail, And then like you have like shows that maybe have completed that are finished, and maybe those are like really useful because like they're still gonna have some audiences and you're still gonna be able to monetize, but this may be more available in the sense like maybe it's not like they're super popular, but they're still there, there's still some audience. And actually when we do that, and it's the next chart, we see it's almost like the opposite, scenario. Because in here, actually Fast actually lead the way in terms of the amount of titles that they have that are actually all titles or like titles that have completed all their seasons, you know?
Right, right, right.
So in here, you see like 70% of all titles that they offer have already completed like the last season, but that still makes them so that they get more than 50% of the demand is coming from this. So that's still, I mean, it's useful because like what you want is like actually capture these audiences that are there that may be, yeah, so it's like targeting that long tail, but still it's driving a lot of traffic. I mean, that's really what you
Sure.
want, right? So
That
it makes
that
sense.
makes a lot of sense. But
Yeah.
so I have a lot of favorite shows that I watch myself that are no longer in production. And
Mhm.
but but most of those are domestic television series, like Big Bang Theory, for example. But
Mhm.
what about international titles? Are they also effective for fast platforms? I'm not just addicted to old TV series in the U.S., but I like international programming myself. So, what about global programming?
Yeah, like that's interesting question as well. And let me jump into the next slide. Uh, because what we see is a very interesting thing for the international titles. When we compare like the amount of titles that they have on their catalogs, for like SVODs, AVODs, and Fast, all of them are very similar around the 50% mark, which I thought is remarkable. I mean, my intuition was like there was gonna be less, but it's actually is quite significant. I mean, it's like half the titles are actually international titles of what they're offering. But
Wow.
what we're seeing is like the demand is actually works out really well for the fast uh, providers. So my hypothesis in here, looking at this data, is like all of these like fast providers like Pluto and like Tubi and all of those are being very smart in terms of really like acquiring international titles that have specific pockets of demand that are going to allow them to actually monetize these titles in a way that is, I mean, it's significant. You still have like 20% of like the demand coming from those. So I thought that was like a interesting insight, that it
Yeah,
actually works better for fast than for some of the other ones.
and that is interesting. And so, that leads me to another question about, what has, the strongest appeal and what kind of genres have,
Yeah.
maybe there's too much of it. Maybe the appeal's there, but there's so much content that it's overrepresented.
Yeah.
Express that?
And we actually did that analysis again. Like we looked into the data. Let's see what the data says in terms of supply and demand. And what's interesting is like we can now basically there are different buckets. Okay, so there's some programming that is very good at attracting new subscribers. There's some programming that is not really working that well for fast. So what I'm going to show you quickly is like I'm going
Okay.
to work into the different genres and see how like what works for what. So starting with the ones that are actually doing really well, when you're thinking about like children programming, for example, you find that for fast, I mean, like what you see here is like about 8% of all the titles are, you know, kids titles,
Wow.
but they're actually attracting more than 10% of the demand. So what this is telling
Interesting.
me is like, look, this is a powerful type of programming that you can use to drive that subscription and drive that, that behavior of people that you want people to come back. So I thought that was interesting. It's a powerful weapon, and even it's way better. Or they're using it better than like some of the A-bots that we see that they're kind of lagging, right? So uh,
Right.
interesting enough. So that's like one thing. So like children's is good. The next one I want to explore is actually animation. And animation, even though they don't have as many animation titles as some of the other, like business models like ABOTs and SBOTs, it still is doing really well. I mean, like in terms of demand, again, like, like they have about 7% of the titles are animation, but like they're getting like an extra percentage in terms of demand. So it's working out for them. So this is something that especially as we see how animation's been growing over the last few years, it doesn't surprise me that fast are kind of like being receptive to that and using this again as a strategy to
Yeah.
monetize that demand that exists.
Wow.
Uh,
Wow. Interesting. So, and when you talk about animation, it includes both animation that would appeal more to adults or young adults, as well as
mm,
animation that would appeal to kids. Uh,
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Right.
In here you have a lot of like anime titles, for example, like all these
Right. Right.
Japanese anime that, like you have core followers for that. So it kind of reminds me again, like when you're looking at the fast model, it seems like you're able to monetize all of these audiences that may be on the long tail, but that like this is a way for them to access eh, to experience, that the fact that you have like this is like a free experience, but then like you can monetize these audiences that may be very niche, but you can monetize them at a grand scale using advertising, which I think is pretty cool. So
Well,
that's
well,
what I'm.
and that always leads to the next question. I mean, advertising and monetization is like, is anything, is there a genre that's overrepresented and
Mm.
there's not enough consumer demand? And this,
Yeah, so let me jump into that.
yeah,
Uh, when you look at reality, right? Of course, like you expect like reality to be part of fast. And what you see is in this case, it's almost like the supply and the demand are at equilibrium. So in this case, we're looking at okay, demand is working, but maybe you don't want to add any more because like it may be that if you add more, you actually like lose your edge. Uh,
wow,
because like if you think about like AVOD, for example, they may have realities that just attract a little bit more. They have a little bit more like a bigger follower.
right.
Uh, but in any case, I think for fast, it's working out okay. I mean, it's delivering as you would expect. It's almost like same amount of supplies delivering like the same proportion of demand. Um,
Yeah. Do you find that the consumer demand for fast is increasing, decreasing, staying the same for different genres? I mean, how has that shifted over the last year, for example?
yeah, so I mean, I think there's definitely an increase just because of the fact that all of these like catalogs that fast providers have, they're increasing in terms of the options that they offer. So just by doing that, you're able to capture new audiences that you weren't tapping before. Uh, so there's an increase, but then like what's interesting about looking at the different, type of programming is like then you understand where is it that you have still room to grow, and where is it where like maybe it's a little bit saturated. Especially when you're fine tuning. When you're thinking about a fast, you have like maybe different channels, right, that are targeting different types of things. And you're always looking into, okay, what is the next channel that I'm going to add? Should I add more reality or should I add more animation? What this data says is like maybe add more animation, because
Really?
it seems like there's still like more demand in there than like what may be in reality. And then actually, if we move into like the next one is like drama, for example, it's even like it seems it's like a little bit oversaturated because like you look at the supply, and it's a little bit higher than what the demand. And again, like obviously drama is the biggest genre, so we're talking about like more than a third of the demand and the supply is coming from these type of titles. You would expect that. Uh,
Hmm.
but it seems like in terms of drama, it's getting to the point where like maybe if you want to grow, it looks like there are other opportunities that may give you like a bigger bang for your buck, based on this data we collect. Again, this is based on 2020. So all of this may be changing day by day. So you have to track this continuously to really make the right decisions. Really, that's what you want to do.
So, moving forward, if I were programming a fast platform, what kind of genres should I be focusing on? You just said maybe animation, but yeah,
Yeah.
comedy or or
Yeah, yeah, definitely. If we go into comedy, for example, we see that it's even like that oversaturation is even at a grander scale, because like comedy now is like almost 20% of all the titles,
wow,
and it's only gets to like to 18%. So like there's like the gap between the supply and the demand is lower. So if I were to expand, maybe I mean, there's a couple of ways of winning this, right? It can be like, oh, you know what, it's like, I'm not gonna add any more comedy titles because it seems like I'm already saturated the market. Or it could be that, look, it's like, maybe I should also consider other titles that are doing really well on AVOD, for example, because if you look at AVOD, which is this blue dot in here, like, actually, like, the comedy titles on AVOD are delivering above their amount of supply that they have. So maybe it's a way to also be strategic and be, okay, let's see what's on AVOD. Let's see if we can get any type of like licenses for these titles that AVOD may have. And then like with that, I can increase also the, create like another demand that and I can exploit. So it's
Wow.
obviously, I mean, there's never like a black and white answer. I mean, I think there's always like analyzing this data is interesting because you can go many directions. And I think what's important is to go into the details and go granular and then understand, okay, what's your audience? What are the titles that your audience are now really exploring? And what are other pockets that maybe you can expand into where like maybe there's a lot of demand that hasn't been like, that is there, like, it's untapped
Right.
demand. So.
Well, I wish we had so much more time, but we are out of time.
Yeah.
And I think this was really fascinating and very informative. Thank you so much for taking the time out today to join us. I appreciate it, Alejandro, and we hope our viewers enjoy the rest of the program. Thank
Yeah,
you.
no, Joe, thanks for the invitation. And I always enjoy sharing like these insights because this is kind of like we go into the data, we explore it, and then we want to share like what we find, right? So it's always a great opportunity to be part of this.
Got it. Well, thank you.